All of these social events that revolve around food make it difficult for carnivores. But if we step back, look at the big picture, we can actually get more out of the holidays. Since I've been a carnivore, I've experienced even more of the Passover message each time I've celebrated. Hello, friends. It's the Carnivore Rabbi. We're here, as always, to meet, pray, and love. And the Jewish holiday of Passover is coming up. It begins this Monday night. It's a beautiful holiday with a festive meal. Many friends and family gather around the table. But it's a tough one for carnivores because one of the key foods we are supposed to eat on Passover is matzah, which is unleavened bread, crunchy unleavened bread. So what is a carnivore supposed to do? If you stay till the end of the video, I'm going to tell you exactly how I deal with it. But first, I'm going to outline some of the issues. So the first problem with Passover is, as I mentioned, the primary food is matzah, unleavened bread, and we can't eat bread. The second issue is the entire festive meal itself, which is a wonderful meal, but it is filled with foods that don't fit with the carnivore life. You've got horseradish, you've got parsley, which is green that you dip in salt water. You've got haroset, which I used to love when I would eat it. It's apples and honey and walnuts, and it's meant to represent the mortar that the Israelites used to make bricks. All of these are part of the foods for Passover. And so eating them presents a big difficulty. A third difficulty is 4 cups of wine. Traditionally on Passover, you drink 4 cups of wine. They represent redemption, freedom. It's all a part of the process of celebrating the holy day. So what do you do as a carnivore? Here are a couple of different approaches. The first is that you just don't partake of anything that involves carbs and that is not carnivore. This is a sort of abstainer approach. And this is totally legitimate because it is guided by a Jewish value known as pikuach nefesh. That means saving a life. And I interpret this idea as that our physical health has to come first. We can't do anything that will trigger a decline in our health or even our mental health. That is a critical component. It's if you're on a plane and it says, put on your own mask before you help others. We have to protect our own health before we can look out and support others. If you are an abstainer, if foods can trigger serious health issues, you can abstain. You can just not have anything. In my Passover Seder, we have a brisket, and I partake of that thoroughly, but abstain from the foods that will trigger you. That is one approach, and a very common one. A second approach is to have very tiny quantities of the foods in question. So if you're going to have matzah, have a tiny piece of matzah. The point is not quantity. The point is observing the mitzvah, doing the act. So if you're going to have matzah, have a tiny little bite. If you're going to have 4 glasses of wine, have 4 drops of wine. This is perfectly okay. Not what's usual, but you are performing the mitzvah. You are symbolically observing it. I sometimes do this on the Sabbath, where we are supposed to eat challah, which is egg bread, and drink wine, a glass of wine. I sometimes will have a tiny drop of wine and a tiny little sliver of challah. You can do this with Passover. You can eat lots of the brisket and have tiny little bits of the other foods. Third point is you look at the big picture. Focus on what matters most. The whole point of the Passover meal is not to eat the foods. It's to tell the story of the Exodus, the story of God freeing the Israelites from Egypt, the story that God is on the side of the oppressed, that God is opposed to human tyrants, that God wants the Jewish people to go free. And of course, this year, in the shadow of October 7th and the massacre in Israel, where Hamas attacked Israel and killed 1,200 people and hundreds of hostages, we yearn for God to free us. We yearn for God to bring justice to the region. And so that is the story to tell. It's not about the food. It's about the message. It's about knowing that God frees us from our own addictions, our own slaveries. That's the point. The food is not the point. The food is an aid to getting us to experiencing the lesson, but there are other ways to get us there. We can tell the story. We can reenact the story. There are some seders where people dress up as slaves and Moses and retell the entire Exodus story by acting it out. The food is not the point. The story, that's what nourishes our soul. And so I think that is a very good approach. You can choose whether you want to have a tiny bit of the foods or not, but you can really focus on the people who are there and telling the story that the holiday revolves around. And there are many different ways to tell the story. If you're looking for some interesting Haggadahs, that's the order, that's the book in which the story is told. I wrote an entire book called What Every Christian Needs to Know About Passover that includes a Haggadah. So this story is near and dear to me, and that's where my focus is on Passover. So in my own personal practice, I generally abstain from any of the non-carnivore foods. I know myself. I know that I am an abstainer. I am not a moderator. If I were to eat a little piece of matzah, I'd probably want more. If I were to have some charoset, I would be very tempted to have more. If I were to have a cup of wine, I'd probably want to have another cup of wine, which would then lead me to want more charoset and most matzah. So for me, abstaining is the most effective way. And I really pour my heart and soul into telling the story, studying the story, teaching the story, trying to live the story in my life. So hopefully this can provide you with some guidance for dealing with religious holidays. I know some people may have similar issues with Easter, with family birthdays, anniversaries, July 4th parties. All of these social events that revolve around food make it difficult for carnivores. But if we step back and look at the big picture, we can actually get more out of the holidays. Since I've been a carnivore, I've experienced even more of the Passover message each time I've celebrated. So I wish, if you are celebrating Passover, I wish you a happy and sweet Passover, and I'll see all of you soon.